So I just retired at 55 years old. I'm in Angeles, Philippines right now recording this, and the rule that made it all possible, my early retirement, is called the rule of 55. But when I first heard about it, it seemed too good to be true. So before I actually walked away from my corporate job doing cybersecurity, I wanted to make sure if it was real and if I actually qualified for it. Because if I was wrong, it would completely blow up my plan. So most YouTube videos will tell you all about the rule of 55 and the fact that it exists, but what they don't generally tell you, I couldn't find any information on this, is how do you prove to yourself that you actually get to use it, that you can leverage it and you're not going to get denied by your company's 401k administrator. I did my homework, I did the research, I knew what the rule of 55 was, and I knew that it seemed to solve all of my problems. The big problem was being able to access money in my employer's 401k prior to age 59 and a half. Normally there's a 10% penalty, right? But that penalty is pretty brutal on top of any income taxes you have to pay. And for most people, that's just not going to work. So if you want to retire early, around the age of 55, if you can leverage the rule of 55, it might be your golden ticket. So welcome back to Solo Life Abroad. Knowing that the rule of 55 exists and whether or not you can actually use it are two completely different things. So in this video, I'm going to share exactly what I did to make sure that the rule of 55 wasn't just some nice theory, but something I could actually leverage to get my 401k administrator to cut me a check when I needed it in the amount that I needed it for. So I'm going to step you through what you need to actually do to validate that you can leverage the rule of 55, the specific questions to ask, and the steps in the right order. Because it would be horrible if you thought you could rely on it and you went to request your money and they said no. You would be dead in the water with no backup plan, and I don't want that to happen to you. All right, let's just go over really fast what the rule of 55 is. It's essentially an IRS rule that says if you turn 55 in the year that you separate from your employer for any reason, fired, quit, whatever, you can access your 401k funds early, 4.5 years early, with no 10% penalty. So this rule sounds simple enough, right? Turn 55, thereabouts, separate from your employer, and boom, you get to access your money. But it's not quite so simple because the IRS only laid the foundation for this rule. They do not guarantee that your employer and your employer's 401k plan will allow you to actually leverage it and use it and call upon it when you need it. You have to verify that yourself. And there's some fine print in most plans that can either make you ineligible or make you do it in such a way that you kind of screw it up and essentially shoot yourself in the foot and cannot leverage it. So let's step through that now. Okay, so you've read through the rule. It looks like you qualify. You are close to the age of 55 and you're planning your retirement date. So that's the first thing. You got to make sure that you will be 55 in the same calendar year that you separate from your employer for any reason. So if that looks good and you figured out that timeline, awesome. The first step to validate all of this is to go to the documentation for your employer's 401k plan and read it. It could be a 50-page document with all the fine print of your plan's details. That's what you want to find. You don't want to find generic language from a Google search about the rule of 55. You need to go to your employer's specific documentation on the website and read it yourself and try to lay your eyeballs on the paragraph or the one little sentence that says something like, an exception to the early withdrawal penalties is if you're age 55 in the year that you separate from your employer. So while that's no guarantee, it is an excellent first step. And I absolutely recommend that even though it's boring and it might take you an hour, go find your plan's documentation and look for the rule of 55 in it and make sure your employer's name is somewhere on that document so you know it's the right document and you're referencing the right thing. The second critical step here is to call them up. And you can say something like, hey, I just read my plan's documentation. It appears that this rule of 55 is supported. Do you see anything in the plan documentation that would disqualify me from leveraging this rule of 55? And then your job is to make sure that when they answer you, that they used your plan's documentation and didn't just go off of memory from a previous conversation they had with someone who is an employee of another different company where their plan might allow it and yours doesn't. So you've got to ask that customer service rep, whoever you talk to, and make sure you get their name. Does my employer's specific documentation allow me to leverage this rule of 55? And get their answer. Then go one step further and ask them to send you an email that references the documentation that makes all of this possible. They may or may not do it, but you lose nothing by asking them the question. And getting it in writing will give you some sense of security and safety that somebody's not making it up. So at that point, I had found the plan's documentation. I read it myself. I saw the language that included the rule of 55, the lack of penalty, or in other words, an exception for early withdrawals without penalty. And then I talked to a customer service rep who gave me his name. He looked at my plan's documentation and he confirmed that I wasn't hallucinating, essentially, but he would not put it in writing. But I want you to ask for it in writing. Now, before we go any further, I want to show you the language that was in my employer's 401k plan that made this possible. There's a section there, more like an FAQ. And the question was, if I don't do a rollover, will I have to pay the 10% additional tax on distributions before the age of 59 and a half? And the first bullet said, payments made after you separate from service if you are at least age 55 in the year of the separation. And that's it. There was a whole lot other reasons why someone might have an exception to the early withdrawal penalty, but that's essentially it. But seeing it in writing like that is only a third of the battle. Yes, that feels good and that can give you some assurance, but that's why you have to call up and actually talk to a customer service rep so they can validate that you read the language properly. Now, they're not lawyers. Their word is not ironclad, but it's the next best thing you can do besides reading yourself is to get a second opinion from someone who is in the customer service department of your 401k plan administration. So once you've done those two things, you can have about 85% confidence that you can leverage the rule of 55. If you can get it in writing from them, well, that might take you up to 90 or 95%. Now, here's the thing that other people will not tell you to do. Wait about 3 weeks and then call up the 800 number again and do it all over again, getting a different person on the phone. And I would not even tell them that you called up the first time. Just make it sound like a fresh call. And by getting that second person and putting them through the same process, if they interpret it the same way and tell you that you can leverage the rule of 55, and better yet, put it in writing, that'll take you to about 99% assurance that the first person didn't just make a mistake. Seems pretty easy, right? But you'd be shocked at how many people, even though it's only another 5 or 10 minutes of effort, will probably skip this step out of laziness. But if you don't want to blow up your early retirement, you've got to go through this step. Otherwise, you're just taking too big of a risk. Now, speaking of risk, there are some other gotchas in general about the rule of 55 that you need to be aware of. All right, the first mistake that you've got to make sure you avoid is don't touch that 401k prior to doing all of this. In other words, don't attempt to move any of your money into a rollover or into an IRA or move it over from your employer's plan to Schwab or Fidelity or anything like that. Do not touch it because the IRS wrote the guidelines that says you have to keep that money in your employer's plan. I'll say that again. You have to keep the money in your employer's plan. You cannot move it. Any kind of rollover whatsoever makes all of this null and void. So my advice is do not move that money at all, either before or after. In other words, the options that are available to you in your employer's 401k account are pretty much going to be permanent, at least until you cross the age of 59 and a half. So keep that in mind. Now, on the upside, though, if you had old 401k plans from other employers, you could, in theory, before you quit, roll those into your current employer's 401k plan so that you have one large 401k administered by your current employer's administrator. If you do that and then quit in the year that you turn 55, now the entirety of the 401k is eligible. Mistake number 2. Sometimes these 401k administrators will offer you a phone call, a consulting call, or a guidance call, and they may advise you to move your money. Don't do it. You can even tell them, I'm working with the rule of 55. That says I can't move my money. Therefore, my answer is no. but their guidance from someone who is not a customer service rep, it could be more like a sales guy who doesn't have a fiduciary obligation to you, could advise you to roll over your money into a different type of account, into an IRA, something like that. And they may not even realize that you're trying to leverage the rule of 55, and they may not realize, therefore, that they're giving you bad advice. So be on your toes. Just because a representative from your employer's administration advises you to do something doesn't mean you should do it, because they are not operating with your best interest in mind, nor are they thinking about the rule of 55. They're probably just working off a sales script. So don't fall for their advice, as good intentioned as it may be. And then one last thing that I want to mention about executing this plan is not to tell anyone. Yes, you had to tell the customer service rep, but they hopefully are not sending information back to your employer. They're not supposed to do that, but it's possible. But what I mean by tell no one is don't tell your coworkers, don't tell your boss. There's really nothing to be gained by telling people, at least until you're in the safe zone, in the year that you plan to quit. So if it's the year or two before and this is in the future for you, just don't tell anyone, because while it might feel good to confess, or you might have some guilt, misplaced guilt about quitting your job, you have no obligations to your employer. If they needed to, they would probably lay you off in a heartbeat with no advance warning. So there's really no obligation, no benefit, except to tip your hand. You might just find yourself fired. And if you tell them this before the year that you're turning 55, you won't be able to leverage the rule of 55. You would have to get another job, a final job, roll everything into that employer's plan, and hope that the language in that plan supports the rule of 55. So why take that chance? It's just not worth it. So just don't tell anyone. You don't even need to tell your friends, your family, your coworkers. Of course, tell your spouse. So those are my secrets on how to ensure that you can actually use the rule of 55. Now, for a lot of you who are retiring early, money is going to be tight. So if you have concerns about being able to afford retiring early, I have a whole series of videos where I talk about the mindset on how I thought through where I was going to live, the cost for doing so, and exploring locations that offered a low cost of living so that I could stretch those dollars as far as possible so that I could live as well as possible until I can start collecting Social Security, which for me is still 7 years away. So make sure you check the links and look at the pop-ups here that are happening at the end of this video, because I really do go into great depth on how to figure out your budget for living overseas, how to shift your mindset about it, and how to find the right location that works for you. So I hope this was helpful. Leave a comment. Let me know if you still have any remaining questions. Let me know if you're planning on leveraging the rule of 55 and overall how you're feeling about your finances, because I am willing to open the kimono and show you everything that I'm doing and feeling and experiencing here in the Philippines as a 55-year-old expat early retiree. So thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video. So long.